Welcome to Equip, Build, and Mature. Hope you're having a great day. We are currently in Mountain Home, Arkansas, in our travels in the States. But I want to share a word of encouragement with you on this Tuesday. Most people read about the crucifixion of Jesus and they focus on the cross, understandably. But the battle for redemption did not begin at the place of the skull outside the walls of Jerusalem. The battle to redeem humanity began in the Garden of Gethsemane. It was there, in the garden, where the weight of what Jesus was about to do for humanity became painfully clear. The name Gethsemane comes from the Hebrew phrase Gat Shemanim, which literally means oil press. The oil press was the place where olives were crushed under intense pressure so the oil could be produced. The setting in the Garden of Gethsemane was not accidental. In that garden, the Son of God was being pressed. In Luke chapter 22, verse 44, there is something medically fascinating and spiritually powerful. It says, being in anguish, he prayed more fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. That is a medical condition known as hematidrosis. It happens under extreme emotional distress or trauma. The tiny blood vessels around the sweat glands rupture, and that causes a person to actually sweat blood. It is extremely rare, but it shows the great intensity of the pressure that Jesus was under before he was ever beaten and before he was ever nailed to the cross. This was not just fear of physical pain. Jesus had already endured hunger, exhaustion, persecution, and suffering during his ministry on earth. The deeper weight was so much greater. Jesus knew exactly what was coming. Not only the torture or the crucifixion, but the moment when each human's sin would be placed on him. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21, this is what Paul writes by inspiration from the Spirit. He made the one who did not know sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. The perfectly sinless Son of God was about to carry the full weight of all human rebellion. Every lie, every act of violence, every hidden sin, every act of hatred, every wrong attitude, all of it would be placed on Jesus. And in that garden, Jesus prayed, Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me. That's Luke 22:42. The cup Jesus referred to was a biblical image used throughout the Old Testament to describe the cup of God's wrath and judgment against sin. The prophets, Jeremiah and Isaiah, spoke of that cup. And it was at that moment in the Garden of Gethsemane that Jesus was preparing to drink the cup. Then Jesus said the words that changed the destiny of humanity. We see this in Luke 22:42, the last part. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours, God's, be done. It was at that very moment that the love of God overcame the pressure of Jesus in the garden. The olive was pressed, and the oil was about to flow. Because when olives are crushed, oil is released. And in the same way, through the crushing of Jesus, salvation would be poured out and made available for anyone in the world who would choose to enter into covenant with him. Before the nails, before the crown of thorns, before the soldiers ever laid a hand on him, Jesus had already surrendered his will to God in that garden. He chose the cross before he ever carried it. He chose you before the world rejected him. That is the love of Jesus. John chapter 15, verse 13 is written, "No one has greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends." The path to that sacrifice began in a garden where the Son of God was pressed, so the mercy of God could be poured out and made available to souls that are searching for God and his truth. Gethsemane shows us something so very powerful. Jesus did not stumble into the cross. He walked courageously toward it, willingly, intentionally, because grace and mercy was stronger than the pressure. This is what Paul wrote by inspiration in Romans chapter 5, verses 6 to 10. "For while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For rarely will someone die for a just person, though for a good person, perhaps someone might even dare to die. But God proves his own love for us, in that while you and I were still sinners, that's when Christ died for us. How much more then, since we have now been justified by his blood, will we be saved through him from wrath? For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, then how much more, having been reconciled, will we be saved by his life?" Today, I want to strongly encourage you. Build your life on God. No one and no thing can ever love you and know you the way that God does. Guys, thanks for taking a few moments with me here today. Hope you have a great day. Take care.